As you know, yesterday, President Cyril Ramaphosa was booed and had to leave the COSATU May Day rally event. Of course, unhappy Sibanye-Stillwater workers voiced their concerns at that rally. Let's unpack what happened. Political analyst Lukhona Mnguni joining us now on the line. So, Lukhona, just looking at the situation unfold, we saw the president trying to actually go to workers to talk to them. That did not work. Talk me through how you read the situation in terms of how this looks for COSATU, the president of the ANC as well.
Shahan, good evening, and I must apologize to our viewers for that technology mishap. As I was saying earlier, what I am starting to pick up is a pattern of discord between COSATU and the African National Congress.
Lukhona?
You will remember this is not the first president who is unable to address a COSATU May Day rally. It happened under former President Jacob Zuma on May 2017. So what we can start looking at, while the reasons may be different, but the outcomes are the same, that COSATU definitely has to go into a room with the ANC and have a very clear understanding of how they are going to approach each other and how the ANC-led government is expected to deliver on the desires and demands of workers. It seems as if they are not on the same page. And it's quite clear if you go back to Zingiswa Losi, the president of COSATU's address at the January 8 statement in Kimberley, 2020, she was quite clear of the demands that workers have on the ANC-led government and the state in South Africa generally. It's quite clear that there's no delivery on those demands. And so what is happening, I think growingly, workers are losing confidence and respect on ANC leaders because they see them as also colluding with big business at the expense of workers. But also Rustenburg is a very tricky terrain for for current President Ramaphosa, because there's the outstanding Marikana business and the apology that he has never delivered there.
I just want to talk about disrespect, which you mentioned, right, for the ANC and the president. Is this also not a sign of disrespect against COSATU's leadership, who has for years complained about the ANC failing to address workers' concerns, but continue to push for support for the ANC come election time?
I do think that there is a growing sense of no longer being in tandem between leadership and members of COSATU. The members of COSATU feel the day-to-day burden. I mean, Sally was just joking now, but seriously, about the changes in the oil prices, cooking oil prices. This is a serious thing that people feel. So if that worker who used to buy a 2-liter bottle of cooking oil at less than 40 rands last year is now making demands for wage increases, because in actual fact the goods that they can afford with 1,000 rands have become far lesser. How does business respond, but also the state respond? So, as you had mentioned earlier, I was in conversation with the former Secretary General of the National Union of Mine Workers, former President Kgalema Motlanthe, and he spoke a lot about an absence of social security in South Africa. We often think of social security for the unemployed, and he said even the employed need to be thought of in terms of social security. So where business fails, government must actually come up and close that gap. So who has benefited from the commodity price boom last year? It's big executives at Sibanye-Stillwater. 7 of them have walked away with hundreds of millions of rands. It's the government. It has walked away in terms of royalties and taxes with billions of rands. But what value has accrued to the people who are at the coalface of production? And that is one of the big questions that it seems the leadership of COSATU is unable to answer. And if the ANC government is failing and they continue to mobilize support for them, eventually the workers are going to walk away from the desires of the leadership.
Yeah. And what about the Tripartite Alliance now? Because I think it's quite damning for the president to have actually been whisked away because the people at the rally, which was very small, by the way, we'll talk about that in a moment, actually refused to allow him to speak. And I'm not saying that this is going to have any impact on the Tripartite Alliance because the president wasn't allowed to speak. But if you look at the greater scheme here and the implications overall, like you mentioned, the support for COSATU's leadership, the support for ANC leaders, where does that leave the Tripartite Alliance?
Well, the Tripartite Alliance exists because those who are elites in the trade unionist movement today within COSATU, they are able to leverage on their proximity to the ANC. They get some people appointed to cabinet, even the Secretary General of the SACP is a cabinet member. So we can count people, your Ibrahim Patels, your Thulas Nxesi, and so on. So part of the reason why the Tripartite Alliance still holds is because it fashions out a very good patronage system which makes sure that certain leaders of workers will eventually be looked after. I mean, even if they are not appointed to cabinet, but they get appointed, like your Franz Baleni, for example, former Secretary General of NUM, gets appointed into a team of experts for ESCOM to try and resolve something. So the difficulty for some in the Tripartite Alliance, especially those who are trade unionists, is that if they were to walk away from the Tripartite Alliance, it would mean that they walk away from proximity to resources, proximity to power by virtue of being able to be in the room when the ANC has its NEC, Lekgutlas, and so on. But theoretically, I think the idea of a Tripartite Alliance no longer holds because working class formations and the party, the SACP being the vanguard of the working class, are exactly there to contest power. And currently, the ANC is one of the power holders in society. And it clearly doesn't want the reconfiguration of the Tripartite Alliance to a point that COSATU and SACP and SANCO have as almost an equal voice as the ANC does. The ANC still remains the final arbiter, necessarily so. People vote for the ANC, and that's why COSATU, SACP leaders are ANC members, because they know that they can't influence the ANC from the outside. As a result, I do think that time is up for the Tripartite Alliance, because you can't be, as they would say politically, be in bed with the enemy of the workers. And the ANC is, by virtue of leading the state, an enemy of the workers, because workers are always in a constructive, and at times not always constructive, tension and conflict with the power holders in society, which includes the government.
And lastly, let's bring in the ANC's leadership with regard to the latest installment of the state capture report, which we spoke about on Friday, because Busisiwe Mavuso, who's a member of the board for ESCOM, writing an opinion piece today in Business Day Live about what was raised in the report. And she very cleverly quotes Raymond Zondo, the Chief Justice, saying this: President Zuma readily opened the doors for the Guptas to go into the state-owned entities and help themselves to the money and assets of the people of South Africa. You and I know she had that argument with Scopa's chairperson, Nkuleka Hlengwa, when she said that they will not take the fall for the ANC's mess. She is now writing this opinion piece, basically vindicating herself and justifying her statement to Scopa about ESCOM being in this mess because the ANC allowed it to be captured. And it talks volumes about this governing party currently in charge of our country.
Well, yes, Shahan. I mean, she was dealing with the visit of Scopa to the two very problematic power stations, Medupi and Kusile. And we know there that the ANC not only did it open way, long before the Guptas, the ANC compromised the construction of those power stations by virtue of wanting in on the procurement process. And that's why Chancellor House went into that deal with Hitachi Africa. And Hitachi was responsible for the procurement of boilers and their delivery. And if you talk to ESCOM engineers who have to deal with that mess, they tell you those boilers, they leak, they need repairs all the time, There are a lot of problems there. And that's because shortcuts were taken, people didn't do the right job. And by the way, Hitachi paid, without admitting guilt, a fine in the U.S. when they were being held accountable partly for that project. So Mr. Mavuso is quite correct that the ANC and ANC-led government is in the mix, but let's not start it at the Guptas. Let's go before that. The ANC as an organization has developed a serious entitlement over the resources of this country. And we need to say that as we see it and as it plays itself out. So the Guptas was just a graduation of a process that had already started. It's just that it was being led by a particular section within the African National Congress. And the Guptas seemingly were benefiting families of a few leaders in the ANC rather than benefiting the ANC as an organization itself. And I think that's where the plot was lost. But I don't think the action itself is problematic for the ANC, at least, in terms of the pillaging and looting of resources. But what was the problem is that the ANC as an organization was not benefiting enough from what the Guptas were doing. Then, of course, Busi Mavuso and Kuleko have a chat about what is the current board doing. So, yes, I mean, all of us who have sat on boards, we accept the shortcomings of previous boards, but at the end of the day, we've got to give a chance to say, what are we doing to clean up the mess? How are we turning the tide? How are we making sure that there's energy security for the country and South Africans can be spared load shedding? But anyway, that's a story for another day in terms of how that interaction went down and concluded. It could have been handled better, and I think even in the quite a reluctant apology that Nkulego issued, he accepts that the interaction between him and Busi Mavuso could have been handled better.
All right, we're going to leave it right there. Political analyst Lukhona Mnguni.